Welcome to Amintro Family, the podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Sammut. We hope you're enjoying the free online platform and community for family caregivers, be it through the Amintro Family app or amintrofamily.com. It's all about helping those caring for their aging parents and relatives or friends and to connect and to share experiences and access valuable resources. So you might be a caregiver wondering what the eventual next chapter of your life will be like. Maybe you're a caregiver trying to figure out your next chapter right now. You've dedicated so much of your life into caring for someone until you're not anymore. Well, now what? Our guest today is an emeritus professor at the University of Toronto, an adjunct professor at Columbia University, founder of UFT's Dynamic Graphics Project and the Technologies for Aging Gracefully Lab, the creator of 5 software firms, publisher of 8 books, and the author of Reinvention, Meaningful Ventures in Later Life, Ron Baecker, joining us on the show. Ron, what a pleasure it is having you on the show.
So kind of you to invite me, Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Now, the principles of reinvention you gather are from those who have successfully reinvented themselves later in life. And given that, I feel compelled to point out that you've written this book on reinvention at 83 years old. Congratulations. Maybe it's not so much reinvention, but more continuation. This is what you do.
Well, my reinvention story is actually perhaps a bizarre one, in that my reinvention was in 2016 when I retired from both the university lab and a startup and vowed that I would still be a productive person, but that I would no longer be a workaholic. And so what's been gratifying for the last 9 years is that I can do stuff, interesting stuff, valuable stuff, and I don't have to devote my entire life to it, which had certainly which certainly was not beneficial for parts of my past life, being a workaholic.
Well, that's good, because I wanted to more clearly define reinvention, because some who have worked all their lives might be looking to simply travel or to garden, or just to read more. It might not sound like much, but it's a change for them. Does that qualify as reinvention?
If it brings them significant meaning, if they do it not just casually, but with a passion, with drive and energy, and if they seek excellence in the endeavor, it's not just done as a matter of fact, but they really think about doing it well, then yes, it qualifies as reinvention. Although the 30 people I interviewed did not fall into this category. They were people who decided later in life, and I define later in life as anywhere from the late 30s to the 80s, they found something that you would think of as a more traditional vocation or avocation.
Well, so some of those that you spoke with, a scientist who now writes a thriller novel each year, a judge retired by illness who became a passionate painter, a lawyer turned inventor and entrepreneur, 2 bankers who founded a school for deaf children, 2 actuaries. One became a lawyer and now represents youth in trouble, and the other now an active participant in the Manhattan musical theater scene. What was it? I mean, we mentioned the judge retiring because of illness, becoming a passionate painter. Maybe aside from the judge, what was it that triggered their reinvention?
Well, I found 6 different kinds of triggers. The first one was what sort of would come to mind, which is retirement. And in some cases, in all cases, the people who reinvented themselves were very thoughtful in deciding what their new passion would be. The second trigger for reinvention was work dissatisfaction, or in some cases, being laid off or being fired. There were a number of people who had throughout their life a burning passion, but they hadn't been able to focus on it full time. For example, a guidance counselor whose true love was magic, and in fact held the guidance counselor job and pursued a little bit of magic on the side for the last 37 years. And when he finally retired at the end of June of this year, was going to throw himself full time into not only learning more magic tricks, but putting on shows and also marketing his skills so that he could do more of it. Sometimes people discover a new passion that hits them at some point in their life. Sometimes it's chance. For example, the scientist who, in fact, was an accomplished scientist both in computer science and also a licensed and accomplished family therapist, wasn't the kind of person who would just sit around. And when he was sick about 16 years ago, he thought back to an incident that he had heard about from one of his undergraduate friends having to do with finding a nuclear fuel cell in an office, an unmarked office along one of the long corridors at MIT. And he took that story, embellished it, and turned it into a thriller novel, and had such a good time that since then he's been writing one of these a year. So sometimes it's chance. And finally, illness sometimes drives people into a totally new direction.
Well, that reminds me of COVID. I mean, COVID happened. It changed everything. And people started to maybe in reinventing, first reevaluating what their life was all about, what they're doing with their time, and kind of looking inwards. And by inwards, some of that is just being home and the everyday things that brought them joy. They thought, well, I'm going to find a way to monetize this and to spend my time doing that. Sometimes the world kind of pushes you into reevaluation and eventually reinvention.
Yeah. Well, certainly COVID was very profound in that respect. And there's a phenomenon that in the U.S. is called the Great Resignation, with close to 5 million people resigning their jobs in the first 3, 4, 5, 6 months after the COVID lockdown. What's interesting, and it relates to the main thing I do nowadays, or one of the main things I do, which is to teach computers in society, I have the feeling that artificial intelligence could be a similar phenomenon or trigger for people having to reinvent themselves. We're already seeing, because of economic turbulence, what some people call the Great Resignation having turned into the Great Gloom, is a phrase that's been used in the media, with people being increasingly concerned about and unhappy about their work. And it's possible that AI will have a similar impact over the next 5, 10, 20 years.
But we could look at it from a positive perspective. Perhaps AI would more be able to enable someone to create some kind of change in their lives, perhaps make things easier, assist them into where they want to go.
Absolutely. And I don't mean to be totally negative. The negative aspect is that there's going to be a huge amount of disruption and uncertainty associated with it. But yes, people have long had a vision that if machines could do the work, that would free us to do all sorts of creative things. And I think that's going to be possible to some extent, but I think we're going to have a lot of it's going to be a very bumpy ride between here and there. And also what society needs, if this kind of thing is going to happen, is more of a social safety net than just Social Security and social insurance, what some people call a guaranteed annual income.
More on reinvention as it pertains to the informants that you had and the 30 that you would have spoken to. How much of their reinvention would have been gradual, and how much would it have been overnight?
It's very rarely gradual. I'm not sure I can think of a single case, because even in the case of illness, which is the serious illness, or in one case, it was the death of a sibling that triggered the reinvention. Even in those cases, there's the need for a process which sometimes takes weeks, months, or years. First of all, to accept that there's a need for a profound change in your life, and then to think about it and plan it out, and then to take a few first steps and try out the new direction. So to illustrate the need for planning, for example, one of my interviewers, Peter Panagopoulos, at the age of 47, he was a middle manager in land development in the LA area, and he was laid off for what I believe was the third time, in part because of economic turbulence in that area due to failures of the aerospace industry. And he had come from a family of academics. His parents, Greek immigrants to the United States, had both been humanities professors. And as he was driving home to let his family know the situation, he said, well, maybe this is the time to mine own self be true, and then went into a process of deliberation and planning, thinking about what his options were. His first thought was university teaching, because that's what his parents had done. But he realized that at age 47, given the academic process and rat race, that by the time he got a PhD and got into line for tenure, he would be pretty old. And so he decided to go back and retrain as a high school teacher, got a job in a school on the coast near San Francisco. And even then, I think he wasn't really certain that this was the right thing. But then here serendipity came in. Sometimes reinvention is caused by multiple things happening at once. And the serendipity was that he was asked by the principal to create a new drama program for the high school. And that was what he was looking for. He spent the next 20 years very happily putting on 4 productions a year with high school kids and making a huge difference, not only in terms of putting on the production, but a huge difference in the life of these kids.
Well, so he took a risk. It didn't work out right away, but eventually it did. And let's talk about that risk. Do we have to actively allow ourselves to experiment with reinvention and find a particular choice just might not be the right way to go? Do we have to just allow ourselves that, hey, that could be the case, and that's fine?
Well, it depends. It really depends on your economic situation and the time of life. My good friend Lee Sproul, who was a very well-regarded academic sociologist, and then I think she would say, unfortunately, then a dean, retired at 65, and she had spent a lot of time thinking about reinvention. And the idea that she had and acted on was quilting. But she got into it little by little. She had done 3 quilts for her daughter over the years. She had taken a workshop, but then she plunged into it, and over time discovered, yes, this brought her great joy, great happiness. She was good at it. And so gradually she built this into essentially a new career. Had she not found satisfaction in that, knowingly, I'm sure she would have done something else. For example, she had considered really throwing herself into gardening, and she and her husband live on a huge tract of land with lots of opportunities to garden. So I'm sure she would have done something else. So it does involve experimentation. It involves focusing significantly enough to really decide, A, is this giving me satisfaction? And B, am I good enough at it that I feel good doing it? And that doesn't mean that, say, in the case of Larry Constantine, he's not selling a lot of books. He could not find a publisher, and so he self-published 15 or 16 of these thriller novels.
Mm-hmm.
But it gives him great satisfaction. It's also, in his case, been very interesting and valuable for his family because it's provided one very interesting topic that he and his wife and their kids often can talk about at the dinner table. His ideas for his next novel, or here, I'm stuck here. What do you think? Which way should I take this?
Right. So the reward doesn't always have to be financial. And I guess it depends on your situation.
It depends on your situation, but the biggest rewards, I believe, are not financial. Certainly in the cases of the 30 people I spoke to. There, for example, Vladimir Roth, who's now, I believe, 91. He decided he had lived in Russia and Siberia until the age of 41, then came to Canada. He had very strong feelings about Stalin and about Russian politics, in part due to the experiences of his family. He had been an engineer. He had run a group of 1,500 engineers at a Lada factory. When he came over to Toronto, he set up his own engineering consulting firm. According to his daughter, who's a friend of mine, even a couple of weeks ago, he had been on the roof of a house for days and weeks at a time this fall doing an engineering job. But 15 years ago, he took his experiences and his interest and skill in writing and started to write, and has now published 6 books based on family and community history in Siberia, and is currently working on his 7th book.
Amazing. There's a whole bunch of reinvention in his story, from moving to ending up writing books. And Ron, I wanted to tell you about my father. I lost him to dementia, as our audience would well know, because I think I mentioned him in every episode that we've done so far, and I think we're up to 14 now. And when my father retired, he settled into just complete routine and comfort instead of challenging himself mentally and physically. And I don't want to blame his diagnosis entirely on that, and I have no way of proving it, but I believe that played a huge part in his illness. Is it vital that retirees seek activity?
It certainly, there's a long scientific literature dealing with the concept of cognitive reserve. And cognitive reserve is the ability of the brain to allow the body to withstand the ravages of plaques and tangles on your brain and have you still not exhibit Alzheimer's disease or dementia. And the literature shows things like people who have had more education develop more cognitive reserve over life. People who have interesting work, challenging work, develop more cognitive reserve. People who are social, people who get aerobic exercise, people who eat healthily, like the Mediterranean diet. This all over a lifetime builds cognitive reserve. There is much less literature about what happens late in life. But for example, I've just reviewed a paper from very highly regarded authors that basically argues, based on a study, that a person with higher purpose in life is 2.4 times more likely to remain free of Alzheimer's disease. So although I have not had time to review all the literature that relates to this, I believe that this is very likely the case. And if I have time, when I have time, I'll go and look at the literature more carefully. But I think we would all agree on this with just in terms of informal interactions and experiences with retired people, those who have something that animates them. And it doesn't have to be writing books. It doesn't have to be painting. It doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be teaching drama. But if there's something that animates you, you're happier, you have more energy, you have more to talk about. I think you're less likely to get depressed. So, yes, I believe it's important for everybody in retirement to get engaged. And as I say, it doesn't have to be something. I mean, I'll give you another example. Mm-hmm. Woody and Sherry McHarg, people I met in San Miguel de Allende, and the history of this book is interesting. I spend part of every winter in San Miguel de Allende, and there are a lot of retired people there and from the U.S. and Canada, and I started to notice a significant number of people in San Miguel who had reinvented themselves. Woody and Sherry, Woody had been in social services on the West Coast. Sherry had been a restaurateur and hotel owner in Ithaca, New York. They met while playing bridge over the internet. Life was such that they eventually got together with a new life together in Palm Springs, California. And they were, I believe, about 60 at the time, and they weren't done in terms of being creative. So they took their interest in bridge, and they found a small duplicate bridge club in Palm Springs that was not doing very well. They bought it, re-energized it, created 2 or 3 other clubs over Palm Springs, and built a multi-site bridge club that became the second largest in the United States, only behind one in New York. And they did this in such a way. They wanted a project they could do together. And there are a number of people I interviewed whose reinvention was done together with a partner, which is often very good for the relationship. Yeah. In their case, Woody's skill was what's called bridge directing, which is essentially running the games in a way that where the critical issue is arbitrating when there's disagreements and when somebody has possibly done something in contravention to the rules, et cetera. And this requires a great deal of assertiveness and a great deal of calm and tact. And Woody was excellent at that. Sherry's skill had been in food. And so she put together, and there's a picture in the book, a food platter. I've played in 30 or 40 bridge clubs in 6 or 8 different countries. I've never seen food like what Sherry put together. And so this became a joint collaborative reinvention, which they did for 10 years in Palm Springs. Very typically, if these reinventions happen late in life, you must think about and be aware of the fact that maybe it'll come to an end. In their case, they sold the bridge studios, moved to San Miguel, and then for a while did it over again in San Miguel, helping to invigorate the bridge community in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. One of the reasons I go there for part of the time in the winter is not only the climate and the jazz and the food, but because of classical music, believe it or not, and because they have 2 small bridge clubs.
And the food.
And the food.
So reinvention would be a big pillar of their relationship, and you really stressed the meaning of successful reinvention, which is one of the 5 foundations you have for successful reinvention. Meaning, as you talked about, you mentioned drive, courage. I think that's been highlighted in needing to meet challenges, excellence, and how it has to be sought, as your words explain in the book, via persistence and continual improvement. Let's get on that. In further talking about excellence, what are the keys to achieving excellence in reinvention?
First of all, it's awareness. um, thinking about what it is you're doing and whether it really meets your standards and it really can be considered excellence, and then taking steps as deliberately and thoughtfully as possible in order to take the activity and make it better, make it more viable, make it more attractive to larger numbers of people to ensure higher quality. I'll give you an example. My friend Maria Karam, who was a computer scientist, was working in England, where she had actually gotten her PhD about 10 years ago, when she got a call from her husband, Robert, saying that Robert's partner wanted to sell the building that Robert and his partner had bought 10 years previously. This building, called the Redwood Theatre, was in the East End of Toronto, had been a vaudeville theater in the 1890s, and had done various things. It was a movie theater at some point. And when they bought it about 2005, it had fallen onto hard times. And Robert and his partner didn't do a lot, but they paid the mortgage, they kept it going, they turned it into a circus school, among other things. Well, the fact that Robert's partner wanted out and had the ability to force a sale made them decide how important that was to them, to Maria and Robert, and they decided it was important. So they assumed a huge mortgage in order to pay Robert's partner out. And Maria returned from England and took over day-to-day management of the theater. And in order to take it from where it was then to where it is now, Maria had to think excellence in a number of dimensions. How to bring in theatrical events, musical groups of the highest quality. And she did that on her own for a while, but 2 years ago, she brought in a person named Bill King, who had been partially responsible for creating the Beaches Jazz Festival.
I know Bill. He's a genius, and he's a great pianist. Anyway, he played with Janis Joplin. He's great.
I didn't, maybe I knew that. I'm not sure. Anyway.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, so she brought in Bill King. So now the programming is excellent. It's eclectic, but it's certainly excellence. They had to think about renovation of the space, which they've been doing gradually as money allows. They had to think about the technical infrastructure in order to put on programs and record them and sometimes stream them, et cetera, and they had to do that. They had to build a staff of people to work. They had to think about how to use different aspects of the space in the building. So there's a wonderful cafe on the first floor. They rent out some offices on the second and third floor, et cetera, et cetera. This required, Maria had been a student of mine, and one of the things my students learn is a sense, a goal, a drive to excellence. And Maria is a good example of that. And it's been that sensitivity, that sensibility that has led to the point that now, if you say, well, where are the major musical venues in Toronto? Well, Hughes Room is one, and they've had also their own traumas to deal with.
Yeah, they had to move a couple years ago.
Yeah, maybe El Macombo, et cetera. But the Redwood is on there, and it's the only thing in that area in Toronto.
Yeah. Well, so we mentioned the four foundations for successful reinvention of yours, and there are five, and the fifth being identity, which the result can be given the meaning, the drive, the courage, and the excellence that you would have needed for successful reinvention. And maybe this is the case with Maria, but how much of achieving a new identity is about your drive for leaving a legacy long after you're gone?
It's complicated. I think I've seen more examples of people doing this, not for how am I going to be remembered after I've gone, but I want to make more of an influence right now. So let's take Kevin Whitaker as an example. He had been a labor lawyer. He became a judge. He was on the Ontario, um, um, the highest court in Ontario. It was felt that he was possibly a candidate to reach the Canadian Supreme Court. At age 59, he was diagnosed with uh, Parkinson's disease, with a likely future diagnosis because of his family history of Lewy body dementia. He felt he had to retire from the bench. He had always dabbled in painting. Interestingly enough, when he was in grade school, his art teacher said, Kevin, I'm going to pass you, but you have to promise never to be a painter. But he actually loved painting. And so this is what he threw himself into for the last 10 years of his life. Unfortunately, he passed away January 1st of this year. But he was successful enough as a painter to hold 6 or 7 exhibits, raise hundreds of thousands of dollars for medical research. And one of the reasons that, and I wasn't able to speak to him, but I spoke to his wife, now widow, at length, and she said one of the things that was most important to Kevin was that his kids would see that he didn't just give up, that he committed himself to something passionate, to something new, to something that was important to him. Vladimir Roth talks about, he wants people to understand how evil Stalin was and how evil Russia is. Is that for his kids and grandkids? Yes. Is that for people who follow on? Probably. So it's complicated, but identity, self-image, self-worth all plays a key role in what I found in talking at length to these 30 people.
You really did. I mean, you've been great for this entire episode. Don't get me wrong, Ron, but I and you spoke so well about Kevin and about saying, see, I can do this. For me, it would have been spite. Spite would have been the big motivator in becoming a painter. I'm going to do this because you said I can't. And maybe that was part of it, but it was much more romantic the way you explained it.
Next time I speak to Marie, I'll ask her. So
yeah, maybe that was it. So what do you say to those, Ron, who might be looking for reinvention but are intimidated by how the world is rapidly changing, especially from a technological standpoint? Like, how does one get over intimidation, no matter what form it might be in?
Well, I talk about courage as one of the pillars or foundations of reinvention.
Yeah.
Courage, the most obvious place where courage comes in is when people at a in middle age or whatever have to change their careers. Another person I discuss in the book is Aaron Marcus, who at age 39 decided that graphic design and academia was not giving him what he was looking for, and he would take the plunge and start the first graphic design company in the world to focus on design related to computer technology and computer graphics and new developments there. So the world is a scary place, but you could do reinvention outside of the world. I mean, you could reinvent yourself as a book reader. Mm-hmm. And as long as you take that seriously and you say, I'm going to read every mystery novel that's ever been created, or I'm going to read the collective works of Shakespeare, or I'm going to read all the 100 great books. I mean, that would be reinvention.
Yeah.
And I think that can be done independent of Donald Trump and independent of what's happening in the world, and provide great satisfaction in your later life. And ultimately, what you're after is meaning in life and satisfaction.
And maybe you've brought it up, but are there common misconceptions when it comes to reinvention?
That's an excellent question, and I don't have a good answer to that because I didn't interview people. I interviewed people who reinvented themselves, not people who thought about it and stopped. There were a couple of people I interviewed I didn't include, and it wasn't and it was in the two cases it was because I decided that they were not going to reinvent themselves, or they were not going to actually do it in the time span that was relevant to me. I think one common misconception could be the need for financial security, and certainly people who have financial security it's much easier for them to reinvent themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't know where your next meal is going to come from, it's hard to think about being creative. It's hard to think about meaning in life.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
that's probably not a misconception. My book is maybe a little misleading because it tends to focus really on extraordinary people. I don't think you have to be extraordinary to reinvent yourself.
Yeah, and that's why we covered that earlier. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
So might the concept of reinvention change in the coming years?
Good question. Well, I think AI is going to change the workplace significantly. I don't know whether that's going to change the concept of reinvention, but I think it'll change the landscape on which a lot of people will have to think about reinvention. That's really the only thing I can think of in response to that. I think if we don't do something about climate change, I think not only will we have, in part because of AI, increasing economic difficulties and economic concerns, I think we're increasingly going to find that we have survival concerns and health concerns due to climate change.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's something we're staring at that we've got to do something about, of course, but that's a whole other episode.
That's a whole other.
It is. Visit ronbaecker.com and pick up a copy of his book, Reinvention, Meaningful Ventures in Later Life. Ron Baecker, what a pleasure it was to have you on the show. We really appreciate your taking the time on this show and bringing the expertise that you provide here, and talking about the informants as you do beyond the book. Thank you so much, Ron, for joining us.
You're quite welcome, and go to Amazon.com or .ca to get the book. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ron. I'm Jeff Sammut. This has been another episode of Amintro Family, the podcast, which you can hear on the Amintro Family app or wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out amintrofamily.com. And a reminder, we want to hear your stories on the forum, and we can share them here as well on Amintro Family, the podcast.